I'm Shivani Gupta, and welcome to the Ask Shivani podcast. I believe that one of the best presents that you can give yourself is time to be able to sit down and ask yourself some questions. I believe that the quality of the questions that you ask yourself will determine the quality of your life. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ask Shivani podcast. The topic I'm going to cover today has been talked about for many, many years, perhaps even a couple of decades, the imposter syndrome. What does the imposter syndrome mean and how does that apply to you? I'm just also going to give you a little bit of a warning. I get pretty passionate about this particular topic. So if I swear, just giving you a little bit of an update that I might end up swearing on this particular podcast. And I hope that doesn't offend you. It's not meant to be offensive. But if it comes out, you just know ahead of time, it's on its way, potentially. So the first thing I want to talk about, the imposter syndrome. What does it mean? A lot of people I come across saying, oh my God, I feel this imposter syndrome. I know I have experienced it, and I am so going to talk about that openly on this particular podcast as well. Now, research says that 70% of us, 70% of humans, male and female, experience the imposter syndrome. So before we dive deep into this topic, that is huge. That is more than 2/3 of us that feel like an imposter at some point or continuously in our life. And 30% of them are actually high achievers. This number blew my mind. I was like, what do you mean high achievers? How could high achievers have that? And then I went, actually, I would like to think that I'm one of those high achievers, maybe not as much as the example I'm about to give you of the Atlassian founder, but I absolutely am a high achiever. And I feel like the imposter. I feel like that at times that we found out that I'm actually not that good or actually not that smart. So recently, the Atlassian founder, Mike Cannon-Brookes, came out and spoke about the fact that he felt like an imposter. Now, Atlassian is one of the stories of the decade in terms of their growth and what they've been able to achieve. It's big. If you want to check them out, go to Atlassian and look up Mike Cannon-Brookes. And you might also be able to have a look at the video that he recently did speaking about being an imposter. And when you look at people like that, you go, come on, mate, you've had phenomenal success. How could you feel like an imposter? But that doesn't matter as we're going to dive into this topic. You could be super successful and still feel like it. You could be super unsuccessful and feel like it. We all feel it, more than 2/3 of us. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about research. Now, Martin Seligman is a name I hear all the time. People talk about Martin Seligman from a positive psychology perspective. A lot of people are studying it. Also, there are a number of schools that are starting to speak about, talking about things and understanding the positive psychology, framing things differently. But when it specifically comes to the imposter syndrome, I love the way that Martin Seligman defines it. He says that there are 3 different parts. There is somebody that can take from an imposter syndrome something personally. So this person thinks that they take things personally. Somebody says something to them, they're like, oh, great. I knew that it was my fault. I knew it was me. So whatever occurs on the outside, rather than them being able to differentiate, well, this might be this person's opinion, or this might be what's happening in the world, they tend to make everything as if it's their fault. They take it completely personally. The second thing that Martin Seligman talks about, he talks about things that are permanent. So if you've got that mindset around something being permanent, that means things are not going to get better. For example, I'm hearing people go, yeah, this COVID thing, doesn't matter how many vaccinations we get, it's never going to get any better. So that mindset of saying that this is a permanent thing has a very big impact on the imposter syndrome. So that means that I'm constantly going to feel like it's not going to go away. I am an imposter. I believe I'm an imposter. And this feeling of feeling like an imposter is never, ever going to go away. Pretty dreary, I think. And the third thing that Martin Seligman talks about is this notion of being pervasive. And what that means is, for example, if I've had one bad teacher, I then just make that general rule that all teachers are bad. If I've had one bad doctor, I think all bad doctors are bad. If I've had one terrible mentor who betrayed my trust and something I experienced, I believe mentoring and coaching is really bad. So he talks about it in these three things. And one of the really interesting things is I wanted to define that for people that are listening to it, to say, if you do feel like an imposter, what is your belief system that sits behind it? Do you have things where you take things super personally? Do you have where you permanently believe that, like this shit is just not going to get better? It's just going to keep happening over and over again, and it's never going to get better. Or do you think that because of that one experience, everything around that particular experience, around that particular type of person, is going to keep repeating to itself for you? So I really want you to reflect on that, work out where that sits. Now, I got really interested in the imposter syndrome, and I wouldn't have even called it that because I felt like an imposter. So I started off my career as an engineer. I did some more further study. I did an MBA, and before I knew it, my career started to fly. Now, partly it was flying because I was in the right place at the right time, and partly it flew because I worked my ass off. I worked so hard, and I wanted to prove to the world that I was super smart. So I'm one of those people that doesn't remember things straight away. Like, I can read something. I'm not a good parroter. I don't recite things very well, but I learn things by experience. I learn things, and I'm a much slower learner. Like, sometimes I'll be reading a book, which I love reading books, and I'll go back and have to read the same paragraph going, wow, that was deep. I didn't get that. And I'll have to go back and read it twice or thrice so that I really get the meaning of something. So for me, I felt like an imposter when I'm surrounded by people who are 20 years older than me, pretty smart, got all these qualifications, have been working in this industry or this particular job for a decade or more, are much older than me, are more wiser than me. And I'm like, what is this 30-year-old, 29-year-old to be exact, doing in this executive leadership team? You know what, sooner or later, they're going to go, look, you weren't our first choice. Sorry, but the person just got back to us a bit later, and now you don't have that job. And I would constantly be in meetings second guessing myself. And one of the things I found myself doing is I was either end of the spectrum. So either I'd be super quiet because my whole belief was, God, if I actually say something, they're really going to realize that I'm really stupid. And what I've got to say really does not matter. So it's better that they assume that I'm smart. So, because once they hear me say something in a meeting, they're going to realize I'm actually not that smart. Stupid, right? Now, but I felt that constantly. So I was so careful about what to say or not speak out or keep my jaw really clenched so that people wouldn't know that I was not that smart, because that's what I felt. The other time I also remember is I remember forcing myself to go, you know what, one of the things I have to do is I have to study a PhD. Nobody's going to respect me. Look at all the doctors in my family, look at all the lawyers in my family. And I know I've got an engineering degree and MBA, but I just felt like the study that I had done was not enough. So I started to speak to some people about having a PhD. And if I had a PhD, then I would finally feel smart enough. I would finally feel like I'm not an imposter. And then I could speak with authority, like all the other doctors, that I now had a doctorate and a PhD. So I started to explore this particular area. And then I went to this extraordinary teacher. And one of the questions that he asked me in a one-on-one mentoring session was, so do you know how many books a PhD student studies? And I said, not really, a lot was my answer, which was pretty pathetic. He said that he or she doing a doctorate would study approximately 40 to 50 texts. I went, oh, okay. Yep, I still read a book, quite a few books. Some years I've gone through 40 or 50 books, so one a week. And he said, well, why don't you, if you really want a PhD on a certain topic, get your topic, order 40 or 50 books, read them all, and then you'll have the equivalent of a PhD on those topics, rather than feel like you need to do all the study for 4 or 5 years. Yes, but what you don't understand is what came out of my mouth is that I need the PhD. He said, for who? Your clients? Family? Or for you? And I went really silent. And I realized at that point it was really to prove to myself, but more importantly, to prove to my clients who didn't need it and to the world that I was smart enough. And I recognize that this imposter syndrome has been with me from a very young age, the feeling like that I wasn't enough of some sort, not smart enough, not pretty enough. not determined enough, didn't focus enough, and really it's carried into what I do. And now I look at that and I think, oh my God, Shivani, you have wasted so much of your time worrying about whether you're a freaking imposter. There's all these people that you help. There's all these people that tell you you're amazing, and you still feel like that occasionally. So I'm being totally vulnerable here, and I'm putting it completely out there and saying to you, it is something that I battle with. It is something that bugs me, and I have some strategies now that I work on it, and I'm going to share some of that with you in this podcast as well. The other thing that happened for me was I won the Telstra Business Women's Awards. And then a couple of people started to ask me to speak. And I was like, why do they want to hear about my journey of speaking? Like, I haven't really achieved a lot. And then more and more people asked me, whether it was speaking at schools, speaking at different conferences, speaking at different, the sponsors of the Telstra Business Awards, that they asked me to come and speak to their staff. Anyway, and then one person eventually said, Shivani, how much do you charge? I'm like, charge? I don't freaking charge to speak. I just go and speak, and I still don't know why people want to hear me speak. So then I started working with what was called the National Speakers Association, which is now called Professional Speakers Association, PSA, in Australia. And then there's an equivalent PSA in the States where it started. And I started to learn about how to be a better speaker. Oh my goodness, talk about feeling like an imposter. So I would arrive at these chapter meetings, I would arrive at annual conferences and conventions, and I would come across these amazing speakers who had achieved so many things in their life. They had injuries, they had been through life-threatening things, they'd climbed mountains. And I was like, who the hell am I to rock up and just talk about this journey of leaving the corporate life and starting up my business? Who would be interested in it? And I really started to feel like a fraud. And I spent years really not coming into my light. And some of you that are listening might really appreciate that. I'm not sure if I've fully come into my light now, but certainly more and more over the last decade, where I had to go, I've got to stop comparing myself to these people. When you compare yourself, I don't find, I never look at somebody and go, wow, I'm actually better than them at that. Most of my comparisons are all about, oh my God, I suck at that, and they are so good at that. Oh my God, look how many followers that they have. Look at them and look how many people love them. Look how many times that they're booked. Oh my God, look at their, so it's constant comparison of what somebody else is achieving and I'm not. Very rarely am I going, oh my God, look how great I am. So my comparisons often leave me feeling like an imposter and feeling like I'm small rather than celebrating the things that I've actually achieved. So I wanted to also look up this definition of an imposter, like how does the dictionary actually define it? And I was bamboozled. So let me share it with you. An imposter is somebody who does not have the skills or the experience or the ability, but pretend that they do. So for all of you listening out there, do you not have the skills? Do you not have the ability? Do you not have the experience? I bet you any money you do. I bet you any money you actually just feel like an imposter, even though you have all of those things. So it's so important to have that look at that definition. They actually don't have it. They're basically taking you for your ride. They're basically selling you something that they don't actually even have, and they're selling something to you that they don't have. Our issue as women is that we have all of that. We've got all of that. We've got the skills, we've got the ability, we've got the experience, but we still feel like we're not enough. I come across so many women that I have the privilege to mentor in the mentoring programs that I run that say that they didn't apply for that job, or they applied for a job and they didn't get it. And again, the pervasive thing, now I'm not going to apply for anything else. That's it for me. Oh my God, you have to go back and look at it, the fact that maybe, and let me just get woo-woo here for a minute, maybe you weren't meant to get that job. Maybe because you didn't get that job, there's a better job waiting for you around the corner. I was speaking to one of the mums at school the other day. They moved to Queensland, where I'm based in Brisbane in Australia. And she has tried for job after job after job and finally found the job of her dreams. And it's taken her almost a year. And she said to me, Shivani, oh my God, I've been through so much, just started to feel like an imposter. And I said, you were not meant to get any of those jobs. To me, I think there's this alignment of the universe that says if you got that job, now then you wouldn't have found your dream job. So you had to hear all those no's to be able to get to that yes. But what we end up assuming often as women is that it's because we're an imposter. It's because we're not good enough. It's because we're not smart enough. It's just because we are not enough and feeling like an imposter around that. The other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to share with you the different types of imposter that you might be feeling like. I've come across this amazing programs that have been run to really help women around the types of imposter syndrome. So the first one is a perfectionist. What is a perfectionist? Well, a perfectionist is somebody that's constantly checking on projects. The perfectionist is somebody that just starts to not ever be happy with the results that you're getting. So if this is you, you could potentially be a perfectionist. You also can't stand any flaws in whatever that it is that you're trying to achieve. And one of the things that you might not be doing is celebrating your successes. And one of the things is you're constantly looking at what you could have done better, what your team could have done better, because you're constantly trying to be perfect. That behavior, in my experience of mentoring women, leads to burnout. That leads to lack of self-confidence, because you're never, ever going to be happy. It doesn't matter if you got 99.9%, that 0.01% that you didn't get, that's what you're going to focus on. So you really need to focus on celebrating your wins. The other type that I come across all the time is a superwoman. In fact, I've been called that. Look, I don't want to be a freaking superwoman. Don't call me a superwoman. I mean, I used to get really excited about being able to juggle everything and being the woman of steel and moving through everything. I don't want to be that. And the superwoman is constantly overworking, stays back and does a lot of different things, pushes to get work completed from the workplace, does not look at any downtime. Anything downtime is unproductive waste. Oh, well, I've got 20 minutes. Great. I'll just get a TED talk in, get a podcast in, get this in. I do sometimes have these certain behaviors, by the way. And one of the things you're trying to do is constantly prove to others how working harder is something that you deserve, rather than saying, I've already got there. So if you find yourself into a bit of a superwoman, one of the things that you might be doing is constantly looking for validation from others. I have a bit of that tendency to do that. So I'm completely just getting out there and sharing that with you, that that's what you might be doing. And one of the things that you really need to do is nurture your confidence, because doesn't matter how much more you do and seeking validation from other people, it becomes really, really difficult. You have to find more of that self-validation around that. The other person that I come across in terms of imposter syndrome is somebody that wants to do everything by themselves. You've often heard in organizations, these executives work in silos. That's the sort of person. So you almost love working in silos. And one of the things that you do is you tend to take projects over. You don't want any help. You need help, but you don't take it because you are going to achieve all of it to do it by yourself. You also thrive on basically fixing all of the tasks yourself. You refuse help from team members, your colleagues, even your boss, even other family members might do that, because you believe that success comes to you if you do it all. And it starts to cause you a lot of stress. Delegation, when you've tried it and it hasn't worked, you go, no, that person was useless. I'm going to take all of that back. So one of the things that you really need to do is work on more great relationships. You need to work on your trust. You need to know that that delegation may not work originally as you intended, but the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you train people, the better they will become at taking that and not trying to do everything yourself. And the last type that I come across are the people that are experts. Oh my God, they're an expert at freaking everything. So one of the things that happens is you're always looking for training. You're always looking for certificates. And as I shared earlier, looking at getting that PhD. So people will go, Shivani, you're an expert, you're a doctor, you've done this. It's never enough. It's like this endless, bottomless well that you're never going to fill because you don't feel enough around that. So one of the things that you really need to do is it's good to learn new skills, and learning is a really big value for me. But if you're constantly looking for validation by having more skills, by, when I get this, I'll launch this. When I have this, I'll do this, then you are going to have that imposter syndrome around that. So one of the things that I wanted to do with you is to talk about the fact that so many people have it. The biggest issue I find when I'm working with women in my masterminds, when I'm working with them one-on-one, when I'm writing, when I get approached at different speaking engagements is, Shivani, I have an inner critic. It's constantly going at me, whether it's one of those 4 areas I spoke about. What do I do and how do I make that work? So one of the things that I say is having an inner critic, having this judgmental voice that's saying that you're doing something wrong is good. If we don't have that voice, you've probably gone completely insane. But you have to manage it. You have to work out how to manage this thing so it doesn't run you and starts to run everything that you do in your life. You want to run it. So you've probably heard some great teachers speak about it. When our ego runs us, we are in deep, deep shit. When we run our ego is always going to be present. But when we run our ego and we can manage it, then we're in control and we know how to maximize it. And we know when ego needs to come in and play that to our advantage and when ego does not need to come in, because then it starts to cause us a disadvantage. So your inner critic is always going to be there. Your ego is always going to be there. The key thing is you want to manage it. You want to manage it. I hope today's podcast has been helpful to you. I hope you've started to recognize if you do feel like an imposter, that it's a very common thing, but start to look at some of Martin Seligman's work, start to look at the 4 areas that I've spoken to you about where you may be feeling like, what is some of the work that you need to do there? And if you have some time, like 30 seconds, I'd love for you to go to Apple and review and rate this podcast, because it would mean so much to me that I've stopped feeling like an imposter around being a podcaster, which I started that journey about a year and a bit ago, and to share this message that I have for women not feeling like an imposter. So I would love your help around that. If you have any questions, please know my website is called Ask Shivani. Go to askshivani.com, go to the contact form, shoot me a note, check it out, ask any questions, and I'll be so happy to point you in the right direction. Thanks for being here on here today. I'm Shivani Gupta, and you've been listening to the Ask Shivani podcast, where I got to ask some questions. Thank you so much for listening. Please follow Ask Shivani on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And if you haven't done so, please go to the Apple podcast and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. It would mean a lot. Thank you.